People with Better Things to Do is presented to you by Cars 4 Chick's Revenge.
Thanks, Bill, and welcome to our podcast, People with Better Things to Do. This episode, we're focusing on The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. I'm John.
And I'm Charlie. What's the theme of The Things They Carried, Jeremy?
We all carry burdens.
This theme is shown specifically through the first story, which details a lot of the things that the soldiers carried within Vietnam, and their weights, including radios with their big heavy batteries weighing up to 26 pounds. Some of the machine gunners carried M60s, which are machine guns. They weighed 23 pounds unloaded. And you have to keep in mind, they're also carrying around 8 to 14 pounds of ammo as well. Riflemen carrying an M16, which is a little over 8 pounds, as well as things such as flak jackets, tools to dig dog holes, flak jackets, water, tranquilizer darts, as well as the psychological trauma and fear that goes along with being in a war.
Yeah, and that's all true. I've heard a few personal stories from my grandfather, who himself is a Vietnam veteran. He used to work on a riverboat that patrolled up and down the streams, and they would be on these very long shifts that were grueling, hot, and just tiring, and they'd constantly be making sure that no one was illegally transporting drugs, that they confiscated and made sure everything was going safely. But their number one thing was to make sure that they weren't having any enemies transport just illegal things at the time. And they really had, a lot of the times they were hiding in trees. So between fighting on these boats, which you're exposing in the open from the trees on the side, it's very dangerous, and I've heard some very interesting stories from him.
So, getting back to our book, I thought in general it was a very, very fun read, with a couple of more serious quotes and some funny ones later down the line. One of the ones that I found was, "War's a bitch," he shook his head sadly. "One leg, for Christ's sake. Some poor f***er ran out of ammo." And that was on page 30 in, I think, chapter 1 or 2. One of the more serious quotes that I had found was, and it hits quite hard actually, is, "They were too frightened to be cowards." That was on page 21. A lot of this book is just completely filled with inspirational quotes. If you kind of know what you're looking for, they're not going to be like game-changing, but it's very much revealant of what was going through the minds of those that were fighting within the Vietnam War, and all of the pain and suffering that they had to go through on a daily basis just due to the mental strain of the entire situation.
So my personal opinion on this book against yours is, I feel like the varying stories were a bit distracting at times. It was a good presentation, kind of like how they do it in Catch-22 as well. It can be a bit hard to understand sometimes, but it does allow for very contrasting viewpoints, allowing for a more broad understanding of the story, and you can understand how more differently people act in real life on an everyday basis, and it's not all just fake in a book. You're able to understand people's motives more, but overall I felt like it was a good story. It just could get a little confusing at sometimes, but overall, very good read. So adding on to what I said about it relating to Catch-22, and this is a shout out to some other ones, so I feel like it definitely goes in line with Catch-22. They both have a very changing, constantly, surprises, twists and turns with plot lines, especially in war, chaos, and losses throughout the story, and the main characters are just constantly surrounded by loss, which is very sad, but it is true and realistic to war. And then they both do present varying opinions, which you can see different views of life from, and that presents a good realism that a lot of people can understand and relate better with.
I think generally these books both try to do a sort of similar thing, but I think just generally this book is more easily understood because of the fact that it's not trying to be one comprehensive storyline, throwing yourself around in the timeline. Catch 22 personally, I found it a little hard to comprehend it sometimes because you're just hopping around so much within that timeline and you're trying to figure out how the things overlay. It's just a little difficult sometimes. But in the things they carried, it's pretty easy to understand because each section is split up by a chapter. And you know going into every chapter that you're gonna have a new storyline, whether that storyline is related, because all the characters obviously stay the same throughout. But you're not gonna necessarily have to have an understanding of the previous stories to understand that next one.
So to wrap up this episode together, I just want to say thank you everyone for listening to this, and I also want to encourage you guys to read this book. It was definitely a unique read, and I think everyone would appreciate it in their own fashion. It really helps present some history, and I know I've learned plenty of things from it, from the multiple perspectives, and also just literary knowledge in general. It's another good to practice your skills with.
Looping back a little bit more towards the theme, some of the strongest men ever are those who fought in Vietnam, and just knowing that even they struggle with mental health is a great thing for some people to know who may be struggling themselves. Just like these soldiers, don't be afraid to fall into those around you, and they can help you get through whatever you're going through in life. Thank you for tuning into People with Better Things to Do. Tune in next time to hear us discuss the geopolitical climate in East Germany. All right, testing.
Wonderful. This is incredible.
You're not loud.
You're dumb.
Cool. Got it.